And there's Sherry with her head buried in the cell phone.
The train. And the tour train is all run by a non-profit called Helena Unlimited, and they are dedicated to the preservation of Helena's history. So did you practice waving? Yesterday at 1 o'clock, and it was awful. It was raining. We were all pretty soaked by the time we got done. Okay, we're going to rumble across the front of the Capitol. It is a neoclassic design. That large dome up top, that is all Montana copper, mined in Butte and smelted in Anaconda. On top of the dome is a large statue of a woman, and I will talk about her a little bit later. It's a little bit of a story. Down below the dome, you see 10 flags. You have the United States flag, the Montana flag, and then 8 flags representing the 10 Native American tribes of Montana.
That's cool.
Down below the flags, you see a statue of a man on a horse waving a saber over his head. He was the 2nd territorial governor of Montana. His name was Thomas Francis Marr. He actually started off his adult life as an Irish revolutionary. Ireland got a little sick of him, so they were shipping him off to Tasmania, which was basically a death sentence back in the day. Well, he managed to escape. He made a beeline straight for the U.S., got here just in time to join in our Civil War. He ended up fighting for the North. And at the end of the war, he was a decorated war hero, and I believe that is why he was appointed 2nd territorial governor. I'll talk about him a little bit more once we cross Montana Avenue, or I guess I'll talk about his demise. At one point, while he was acting as the governor, he was working his way north on a steamboat. He was going to buy a bunch of weapons and bring back to Helena, when he just kind of vanishes into thin air. There's 3 different theories. One is that he ran into some local Indians and maybe they killed him, although experts think that was the wrong time of year and the wrong location for that to have happened. Theory number 2, he was known to have his share of political enemies, so that's kind of a big maybe. Theory number 3, which is most likely, he was known to be a bit of a drinker, and there's a good chance he just had one too many and fell off the boat and drowned. No body was ever found, so we just don't know for sure. Let's talk about the statue on top of the dome. They started building the Capitol in 1899. And the first crew they had hired, they were up to some funny financial stuff, missing receipts, a mysterious little office fire. So they ended up firing the first crew. They hired a second crew, and as they were finishing up the Capitol in 1902, that statue just shows up at the train station. Nobody knew it was coming. Nobody knew who had ordered it. They had a pretty good idea what it was for, just by the size of it. So they went ahead and put it on top of the dome, and she reminded them of the Statue of Liberty, so they named her Lady of Liberty. So that's 1902. 104 years go by. 2006, they get a letter from the granddaughter of the man who had actually made that statue. She had found an old trunk in an attic somewhere full of old newspaper clippings and photos. Well, he had known exactly who he was making it for, and he had named her Lady Montana. So that's what we call her now. We just had the wrong name for like 104 years. I'm going to scoot over here, see if some of these cars can get by me if they want. I don't know how many Hollywood buffs we have on board, but I'm sure some of you recognize the name Gary Cooper. He was a Hollywood actor, starred in over 100 black and white westerns. Well, he was born and raised right here in Helena, about 3 blocks to our right. A lot of ladies back in the day, including my mother-in-law, considered him one good-looking cowboy. Now, here's something kind of strange on the street. Doesn't really have any historical significance that I know of. But if you look at the addresses, we are on the 700 block. The very next block are the 500s. I do not know why there's no 600 block on the street. And nobody's been able to explain that to me. Okay, I've got another Hollywood name for you, but she's a little bit more obscure. Her name was Myrna Loy. She was actually born in Radersburg, a small town about 35 miles from here. Her family moved to Helena when she was 12. She stars in her first play when she's 15 here in town. Then her father ends up getting the Spanish flu in 1918, passes away, so the family moves off to California. She gets discovered by Hollywood and has quite the career. I know she did one movie with Clark Gable. Well, she always said she absolutely loved Helena, Montana, and when she ever passed away, she wanted to be brought back and buried here, which she is, and we ended up naming a building after her that we will drive by in about 35 minutes, give or take. It's actually one of my favorite stories about a building on the whole tour. One right behind it. So when you're level with that black mailbox that has 318 on it, if you look to your right, you will see an old stone carriage house with sliding glass doors. That is where Charlie Russell stayed and did his artwork while he was in Helena, Montana. He was a prolific artist, over 4,000 pieces credited to his name, but he's best known for his Western oil paintings. Okay, if you look in front of you and to the left, I'm kind of pointing at it, this small apartment complex. It says Chessman. Just keep that in your brain for a second. I've just kind of recently added this to my spiel on the tour. The original governor's mansion on our left, that was built by William Chessman. The Chessman Reservoir is named after him, and he actually built this home in 1888. It was only the second home with indoor plumbing. There are 20 rooms inside, 7 fireplaces. So he's kind of a big dog in the 1890s, right? He's going to go off to the Chicago World's Fair in 1896. Most of his money is based in silver, and the general consensus at the time is that the American government is going to base the dollar on the silver. So that's kind of what he's gambling on. He makes it all the way out to the World's Fair in Chicago, finds out that the government changed their mind, switched it to gold standard, and he is actually now broke. So he has to borrow money to get back to Helena. He lasts a few years in his home before he has to sell it and actually move to his little apartment complex with his family, and that's where he ends up passing away. The home gets bought by the state in 1913, and 8 different governors lived there from 1913 to 1959. Okay, this brown brick building on our left, the Sanders Bed and Breakfast, that was named after Colonel Sanders, and I don't mean the fried chicken guy. This guy was Colonel Wilbur Fisk Sanders, and he was actually a lawyer. Well, gold was first discovered around here in 1864. As you can imagine, there was a few wagons rolling around the countryside that were worth a little bit of money. Somebody starts robbing them on kind of a regular basis. Nobody can quite figure out who's doing it. Well, Colonel Sanders realized it's the local sheriff, a man named Henry Plummer, good guy by day and bad guy by night. So they end up rounding him up along with 12 of his buddies, and they hang them all. That solves that problem. I was just told by a writer on this tour that the Barrister Apartments on our left, that originally was a Catholic rectory where his parents were married, which I think is pretty cool. Now we're by the cathedral. This was modeled after the Vogue Cathedral in Vienna, Austria, and another one in Cologne, Germany. This one's best known for its stained glass, which looks fantastic from the inside of the cathedral. The outside is actually covered with half-inch thick plate glass, so you can't really see the colors. The cathedral's open 8 to 5, Monday through Saturday, to the general public. You can just walk through those doors and take a look around. You might want to avoid the noon hour. That's when they hold Mass. Unless you want to participate, you're more than welcome. Okay, right in front of us, that playground equipment, that is Central Elementary School. That is where they built the original elementary school in 1878. What they didn't tell the kids was that they built the elementary school on top of a graveyard. And after a particularly rainy, stormy spring night, all the kids came to school the next morning, and the body of a dead miner had washed out of the mud, was lying out in the open. Apparently, your hair keeps growing after you pass away, and his was all red, so they ended up nicknaming him Redbeard. Coming up in front of us and to the right is a gray stone building with a reddish-orange piece of art. That is the Holter Museum of Art. They feature a lot of local artists. They do a lot of stuff with little kids. But historically, its claim to fame is there was so much money in Helena back in the day that the Ford Motor Company brought out one of their Model Ts and displayed it in that building.
Here's stone type.
Yeah.
We're going to stop at this light. This is Last Chance Gulch. This is where everything got started. We'll be back here in about 15, 20 minutes, give or take, and kind of run the length of it and talk about it some more. Coming up on your right is some two-tone tan office space. That was originally built as stables for the rich folks who didn't like the smell of their animals around their homes, so they kept them down here. Let's talk about rich folks. I'm going to take a left on this street. We're going to talk about the brown brick building at the end of the street on the right. That is the Montana Club. It originally opened in 1888. There was only 2 requirements to join the Montana Club. You had to be male and you had to be a millionaire. And when they opened in 1888, they had 135 members, which meant there were more millionaires per person in Helena, Montana than any other city in the United States. And I still find that amazing, even after saying that several hundred times. You'll notice the stone columns that come down to the sidewalk on the right. The second to last one has a square plaque. That is the approximate location where gold was first discovered. The entrance to the Montana Club is on the right in between these first 2 vehicles. And I don't really know what's going on with the Montana Club. My wife and I had reservations in March, going to have an early birthday dinner for me. And they ended up emailing us, texting us that the Montana Club was closing. So that was a bummer. And then in April, I read in the newspaper that some guy bought it for $1.3 million, the Montana Club and the little saloon bar down in the basement called the Rathskeller. And supposedly he was going to fix it all up, and I haven't heard a word since. So I don't know.
That's a little long.
I don't have a clue what they're doing. There's a lot of history in the Montana Club, so it'd be nice if somebody kept it going. Coming up with this light in front of us on the right is a pinkish stone-colored building. That is the Grand Street Theater. They put on a lot of plays using local talent. Typically try to involve a lot of kids. The mill was originally built as the first Unitarian church in town. Then later it became Helena's Public Library. Then it became the Grand Street Theater. And according to the Google, it is one of the most haunted buildings in the state. Something to do with that first preacher's wife still in the building. Her name was Claire. On your right is a sandstone-colored building. That's the Grand Lodge for the Helena Masons. Their claim to fame is that they possess the Masonic apron of one Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Although the place is hardly ever open, so I don't know how many people ever get to see it. Coming up on your right, just on the other side of that YWCA, is the oldest church in town. That's the Episcopal Church. It also has some pretty good-looking stained glass. This large building up in front of us, kind of a tan yellowish that doesn't really seem to belong here in town. Well, that was built by the Algerian Shriners in 1935. There was a bit of an earthquake, destroyed most of that building. The Shriners couldn't afford to fix it back up, so they sold the whole mess to the city of Helena for $1. Helena rebuilt it, added the fire station on the right, and that is now our Civic Center. There's a large auditorium inside and a big ballroom. They host all sorts of different events. Trade shows, live music.
See the fire station? I've driven past it numerous times, never knew it was there.
We're going faster.
Yeah, true.
Hey, we're getting
And I'm
ready
driving.
to enter Helena's West Side Mansion District. We're going to look at some really big homes.
Like, you mean we're not living in the right place?
To the right at the sidewalks, you'll notice they changed from a concrete sidewalk to a brick herringbone sidewalk. Those were original to the neighborhood, 1880s. Maybe not as flat and smooth as they once were, but still pretty cool. As we get ready to cross this street, you'll notice a couple of hitching posts. One on the left in the shape of a horse, one on the right down by that tree. That's where you would have parked your trusty steed. First mansion we'll talk about is on our right, this red and black one. It was built by Charles Power. He was the one and only son of T.C. Power, who was the richest guy in town at the time. This home takes up one entire city block, and the little red building between the two larger ones was built just for the children as their playhouse. Keep your eyes open for deer. I see them up in this neighborhood quite often, actually. We're going to take a right and talk about this mansion on our left. This was built by a cattle baron named Charles Sweat. And just as he was finishing up the home, he decided he and his architect were going to go back to St. Paul, Minnesota, pick up a bunch of furniture for the place. Well, when they left Helena, Charles Sweat had a little bit of a cold, which shouldn't have been a big deal. Except by the time they got back to Minnesota, that little bit of a cold had turned into a full-blown case of pneumonia. He actually passed away back in Minnesota, never living in the home he built here in Helena. That is a shame. Coming up on our left is a Tudor-style mansion. The black and white over the gray stone. That was built by an iron industrialist named B.H. Tatum. He built the mining equipment and a lot of the decorative fencing you still see in this neighborhood. Well, he and his wife threw a very large party for their 25th wedding anniversary. The local paper at the time dubbed this the most elegant home in the west side of Helena. Mrs. Tatum was a bit paranoid about her silver, so she was always hiding it all over the house after any parties they had. And years later, when they were long gone, people living there would occasionally find like a little silver teaspoon tucked into some nook or cranny. Coming up on the right, I call this one the creme de la creme. This mansion was built by T.C. Power, who I mentioned was the richest guy in town at the time. He had 95 different businesses. He built that large portico on the right just so he wouldn't have to stand in the rain or snow getting in or out of his carriage. This home was originally furnished with Tiffany oil lamps, which were later converted to electricity. And inside, there was all sorts of cherry hardwood that had to be hand-carved in place. I think you have to admit it's a gorgeous home. Well, unlike the other rich people, he didn't mind the smell of his animals. So that large building in the back that's partially covered with those vines, that was his carriage house.
Some people love their animals. There's one.
Yep.
Ah, there's a deer on our left, right in front of this house.
Hi. He's shy.
And coming up on our left, a mansion with a natural wooden colored shingles. That was the first home built at Helena with an elevator in it. There was actually a couple of sisters that just wanted to live really close to each other, so they talked their husbands into building this mansion, and there's a blue one just on the other side of it. They're similarly built. Well, these families traveled to Europe kind of extensively. You'll notice the two statues on the front porch of the blue mansion. I'll give you a little bit of trivia. Everybody thinks those are gargoyles. They are actually grotesques. A grotesque is an ugly statue. A gargoyle is an ugly statue that spits water. So gargoyles are typically seen up high on a building, and the only reason I know that is the driver who trained me is a high school art teacher. Okay, I do a lot of kid tours in May, and they absolutely love this mansion on your left. They think it looks like a castle. That was built by a young fella named A.C. Johnson. Moved out here when he was 19 years old, went to work for TC Power, became his head teller at the bank. Then he sat on the board of directors. Then he started his own insurance company, and he actually built that mansion back there at the age of 24. Okay, now I don't know how many of you know that our governor, Governor Gianforte, ended up buying a mansion in the neighborhood. The current governor's mansion is under some kind of renovation. It's been going on for a couple of years, and he's a very wealthy man, made a whole bunch of money in Bozeman, so he decided to buy a mansion. He bought this one on our right, which was originally built by Samuel T. Hauser. The Hauser Dam is named after him. He was the 7th territorial governor of Montana, appointed by Grover Cleveland. He was the first governor to actually live in the state year-round, so this was kind of unofficially the first governor's mansion. That place has 29 rooms in it. Most of the mansions in this neighborhood are modeled after this one. They all have a dedicated third-floor ballroom. Apparently they threw a lot of parties amongst themselves. Well, I want you to remember his name, Samuel T. Hauser. He had a bank down on the walking mall. They did something kind of strange to on the outside that I will point out when we get there. Well, when he got done building that one, he built this other red brick one right across the street from him, and he gave that one to his daughter as a wedding present. Pretty nice digs for a wedding present. My personal favorite mansion is coming up on our left. I'm actually going to take a left so we can look at it from the front. I think it is absolutely gorgeous. This mansion was built by another cattle baron named Conrad Coors. That's K-O-H-R-S. And apparently he was good friends with President Teddy Roosevelt. Invited the president to come out and visit, and the president agreed. So the government sent some men out to remodel a bedroom for the president, and they put in a bathroom that they lined in lead to make it bulletproof. Well, the president got a little too busy to actually make the visit, but supposedly that lead-lined bulletproof bathroom is still in that home. I don't really know why a fella needs a bulletproof bathroom, but it's still kind of cool. That'll be it for the Mansion District. We'll head out of here, head downtown, see if we can find some people to wave at.
might have to look into that.
Yeah, we're pulling out onto Benton Avenue. This was named after the Benton Road. Back in the day, a lot of supplies coming to Helena were coming all the way from the East Coast. The closest they could get to Helena by water was Fort Benton, which is about 130 miles north of here. Well, some guys got the idea of building a road from Fort Benton to Helena so they could use wagons with mules and oxen and bring the supplies the rest of the way. Well, they call that road the Benton Road. Most of it is long gone by now, although there's a little bit of it left over on the other side of downtown, which I'll point out in about 15 minutes.
Cold. Just a little.
Coming up on your left, you'll notice some tennis courts. If you look over the top of the tennis courts, you'll see some red roofs in the distance. That is our Carroll College, home of the Fighting Saints. It was originally built as a seminary for Catholic men going into the priesthood. Then later it became a co-ed Catholic college. And I'm told it has a pretty darn good nursing program. If you guys are around on the weekend, the street we're getting ready to cross on the right, that's where our farmer's market is every Saturday morning.
Okay.
Runs for a couple of blocks.
It starts right here at
This park on the right is called Women's Park. They built it for the rich ladies back in the day whenever they'd come into town to do a little shopping or have lunch, what have you. This would give them a place to rest before they walk back up to their mansions.
They walk.
Coming up at the front of us at the light on the left, you see a large white building, the Steamboat Block. That was originally a hardware store built by T.C. Power. That was one of his 95 businesses. He called it Power Townsend. We still have a Power Townsend, actually, that competes with Home Depot and Lowe's. And I was told that building was built to look like a steamboat, and I don't really get it. But then I haven't been around a lot of steamboats. You'll notice when we go through this intersection that there's 5 streets that come into it. We call it Malfunction Junction. True story.
I believe that.
We're going to take a right onto Last Chance Gulch, and this is where everything got started. They named this after 4 miners they called the 4 Georgians. They weren't actually from Georgia, but it was a method of mining that they used. Those 4 fellas that come out west, searching gold, trying to get rich. They basically weren't having a whole lot of luck. They had already sold some of their equipment. They were going to spend one more night here, then start working their way back east, get jobs like the rest of us. But before they went to bed that night, they thought, let's go down to the creek and give it one last chance. So they came down here, started panning for gold, and bam, they hit it, the mother lode. Over $30 million worth of gold was pulled out of here in the next 20 years. That's equivalent to $27 billion in today's market. Now, with your boarding pass, you get some discounts at some businesses. One on the right, the Wild Child. I'm not even sure what you get there. They are new this year. The No Sweat Cafe on your left, really popular breakfast place. And we've got the Fire Tower Coffee House on the right. I think they give you 10%. And I got some parallel parking going on here. Subaru's going to make it. I don't think the pickup truck is. He's going to be a little far. Oh, now he's making a bad move. Oh, yeah. Well, now he's regrouping.
Sort of made it.
Let's see if he calls it good. I think he is. Well, let's say you made it.
Close enough for
Yeah,
government.
and I did say that this was a river. This is where all the mining claims were. That's kind of why this road meanders left and right. And I was reading a book about a year and a half ago trying to find out some more about the history, and they blame an earthquake for relocating the river. And when we go through this light, if you look left and right, you'll notice it all comes down to this point. And anytime we have a really heavy rain or a big snow belt, it actually floods down here. I've seen that bar on the right, the gold bar, flood a number of times. Okay, coming up in front of us, I can see it right about now. There's a 6-story stone building on the right. That was T.C. Powers Bank. That's where he and his son Charles worked. Well, for whatever reason back in the day, people like to hang out on street corners. So T.C. wanted to make the corner of his bank really unique. So when we drive by it, you'll notice the first floor has one window in the corner. The second floor has 2, and on until there's 6 windows on the 6th floor corner. And I hate to admit it, I lived here for over 20 years. Never noticed that until I started driving the tour train 3 years ago. And I've only walked around that corner for ice cream a couple of gazillion times. Okay, you're not allowed to drive on the walking wall unless you have a train and a bell, which I just happen to have both. So that's why I know I am coming. Okay, you got your Big Dipper on the right. That is really good ice cream. There's a fine dining Italian restaurant called Luca's. Kind of a small place, so you'd need reservations if you want to eat there.
We'll have to check that
Statue
out.
of the
We got food there.
paperboard on the
The gift
left.
certificates.
Okay.
I think that.
You've got a great little wine bar on the right called the Hawthorne. They feature wines from all over the world, not just California. Then you have prepared confectionery, been serving sweets since 1922. Got some little kids waving at us. And that weird thing that Samuel T. Hauser did is coming right up. I'm going to stick my arm out the window so we're all kind of looking at the same spot. You're going to be looking at this red stone building on the corner. And what you're going to be focusing on are those 2 windows behind the lamppost. And if you look between the arches of those 2 windows, you see a round circle, and inside of that circle is kind of a strange smudgy mark. That is a copy of Samuel T. Hauser's thumbprint that he had etched into the stone at his death. And I haven't decided if that's really creepy or kind of cool. It's definitely one or the other.
Yeah.
As we get ready to cross this street, if you look back over your right shoulder, you will see a large mural that depicts all the different kinds of women. I hope to make Helena what it is. We'll cross the street, and there's a statue of a couple of guys sluice mining on your left. That was much more efficient than panning for gold. Coming up on the right is a really unique gift store called Birds and Beasley's. I believe she gives you a 10% discount. Coming up on our left is a nice little restaurant called the Windbag.
The windbags.
That was originally a brothel that ran until 1979. It was run by a woman they all called Big Dorothy. There's some photos of her inside the restaurant. She was a pretty tough-looking old broad, but apparently she was very generous with her money, and everybody loved her. This Brothers Tap Works on your right. I believe they give you 50 cents off of a beer. That was opened up by our last governor, Steve Bullock, and his brother last summer. They do a trivia night every Tuesday night where all the tables compete against each other. It's actually quite a bit of fun. we've got kind of a tight right turn coming up. And quite often, a couple of those gold cars will scrape the concrete, so don't panic. Yep.
There's the library. I think I need to return my books. Oh, I have to check them out first.
So we're going to take them out. Coming up on our right is an original Pioneer cabin built in 1864. That one was considered quite luxurious because it had a full-length window in the front of the place, and it also had wooden floors. This whole complex on the right, Reader's Alley, kind of a fun place to walk around. Well, it was originally built by a man named Lewis Reader from Pennsylvania. He had come out west in search of gold, trying to get rich, and he wasn't having any luck either. So he decided to do what he did best. He was a bricklayer by trade, so he built 30 one-bedroom brick apartments that he rented out to the miners during the cold winter months. That's how he ended up making his fortune. Take this left, all of this grassy area on the left, and including the parking lot between us and the building over there, this is where all the Chinese immigrants lived. And at one point in time, about 20% of Helena's population were Chinese. Well, when urban renewal came rolling through town in the 1970s, they would inspect buildings and decide whether to leave them as is, fix them up, or bulldoze them. Well, they decided to bulldoze all of these homes, and when they did, they came across some tunnels that they hadn't known about. There's two theories about those tunnels. One is that the Chinese were doing a little gold mining of their own, and the other theory, the one I actually prefer, is that the Chinese were running underground opium dens. This was considered the seedy side of town, and we know for a fact that the Chinese had underground opium dens in Butte, so it kind of stands to reason that they would have had them here as well. Was you sure you think there's a strange driving path, but I just wanted to let the car go by? What happened? Hello? Oh. That's all right.
What are you doing?
I had a kid last summer whose favorite hat blew off right at a major intersection with a light. I had to come back a little bit later and find it on my own, and then go back and find her in the cemetery. They were doing a tour. You bet. Are we ready to roll? I'm assuming that's a yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, up in front of us and slightly to the left, you'll see a fire tower up on the hill. That is the Guardian of the Gulch. And right below that is a blue stone home that was built by an Irishman named Shanahan for he and his wife-to-be. Well, he ends up getting into some kind of scuffle in a bar. He gets shot and killed. She inherits the home, but she can't afford it, so she sells it in 1900. And from 1900 to 1935, there are absolutely no records of what went on in that home. Now, a lot of old-timers would talk about a really nice brothel called the Castle, so that's what most of us assume was going on in that building. Well, it was also partially destroyed in the earthquake in 1935, but urban renewal decided it was worth rebuilding, so they actually took the whole thing apart, marking all the stones, and completely rebuilt it with fresh mortar. And you can see how nice it turned out. The reason for the fire tower is we know that Helena burned to the ground at least 6 different times. Apparently miners were more concerned with finding gold than they were at their living quarters, so they just threw up these ramshackle little wooden huts, throw in a few cigars and a little whiskey, and there you go, up in smoke. So we built that fire tower in 1884, manned it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And actually wrapped it in Christmas lights during the holiday season, kind of pretty. Well, it's not kind of pretty, it's very pretty.
Sonic Temple. Well, that's an off-camera hill, and then
Is this Broadway again?
yes.
Coming up on your left on the other side of that red Ford pickup truck is a red brick building with a white roof. It's not particularly attractive or anything, but that was an assayer's office. That's where you would have taken your gold to be weighed, or melted down, weighed, and then they would put money in your account. They'd pay you in cash, whatever you preferred. So there was only 7 assayer's offices in the entire country at the time. And for Helena to have one of its own just goes to show you how much gold they're actually pulling out of the ground. Then you've got the county courthouse on our left. Now I'm going to take a left on the street and show you a little gray stone building over there that says the Myrna Loy. That was the one named after the actress Myrna Loy. Not all the drivers turn down this little street, so I'd like you to get a good close look at it. So you're going to be looking right, and if you look at their windows, you'll notice there's bars in the windows. Well, they originally built this as a jailhouse in 1884. And Helena threw so much money into it, it was considered the most ornate jailhouse in the United States. The local sheriff at the time was so proud of it, he actually held his daughter's wedding reception inside the jailhouse.
Jury duty.
Okay.
Which I think is a great story. Actually went in there about a year and a half ago to see if they had any photos of what it used to look like when it was a jailhouse, and they did not. I'll tell you, that house on the right took no more May seriously. I'm going to take a left here, and that puts us on the home stretch. You know, for the longest time, they kept calling this place Last Chance Camp after those 4 miners. Well, once gold was discovered, the town started growing so rapidly, everybody decided it needed a real name, so they held a contest. A couple of guys came up with the name Squash Town in Pumpkinville, and I'm sure those 2 fellows thought they were hilarious. Somebody else came up with the name Toma, short for Tomahawk. And then a fellow came up with the name Helena. He said it translated to mean City of the Interior. Well, everybody liked the idea of that, so that's the name we ended up with. Well, they find out a little bit later that that fellow was actually from a small town in Minnesota named Helena. So maybe he made up that whole translation business. Don't know. Helena sits at about 4,100 feet above sea level. Average year-round temperature is 47 degrees. There's about 35,000 people that live in town. When I started doing this tour 3 years ago, there was only like 28 or 29,000. This town's kind of gone nuts the last few years. Well, in the 1880s, it was pretty obvious Montana was going to officially become a state. So you had a number of cities vying to be a capital, economically a lot safer that way. You had Anaconda, Butte, Bozeman, Boulder, Deer Lodge, Great Falls, and Helena. Towards the end of the contest, it was between Anaconda and Helena. And what it really boiled down to was a fight between two very, very rich guys who did not like each other at all. You had Marcus Daly, who owned the Anaconda Copper Mining Company, and then you had William Clark, who was actually from Butte, but he was representing Helena. Well, between those two guys, they spent over $3.5 million on the election. This was before women even had the vote. So they were spending roughly $1,400 per voter. Back in the day, you didn't have mail-in ballots. You didn't go to the fairgrounds to vote. Everybody went to the sheriff's house to vote. That is coming up on your right. It is the black house with the brown staircase. The year is 1892. Everybody's going there to vote between Anaconda and Helena. They tally up the votes. Helena squeaks out a narrow victory. Like I was saying earlier, they start building the Capitol in 1899, finish it in 1902. Sheriff moves out of the house at some point. Some other people move into it. They decide they're going to do a little remodeling. So they tear down a wall, and guess what they find? A box full of ballots, all voting for Anaconda. I know, right? And there's still some animosity there. And I believe it was the year 2000, Anaconda tried to introduce some legislation in our state government that would force Helena to pay Anaconda for lost wages and such. Now, the legislation didn't go anywhere, but it just kind of goes to show you they're still a little upset about it. Now, for you folks from out of town, this is when I usually start talking about the sleeping giant. It's kind of an anomaly we have in our mountains. Basically, that's exactly what it looks like, is the giant lying on its back sleeping. And I don't know if we're going to be able to see it today, but when I take a left up at this four-way stop, you can typically see it off to the left. If you're looking for the tallest mountain, that'll be his chest. And to the right of that, you'll see what looks like a head, a nose, and either lips or a chin. I should be able to see it or not see it here in a second. Oh yeah. A little bit clearer than I thought. I'm looking at it right now. And if you guys haven't done it, there's a fantastic boat tour. If you drive out toward the Sleeping Giant, about 15 miles, there's actually a couple back there on the tour train that did it yesterday. But it's a fantastic tour. When Lewis and Clark were coming through on the Missouri River, all they could see was the cliff face in front of them. And they've had great. We're going to have to unload these canoes, pack it all up and over or around. But the closer they got to that cliff face, it just seemed to open right up. They could see all the way through to the valley on the other side. As they went through, looked back behind them, it appeared to close right back up. And that's how it got its name, Gates of the Rocky Mountains. I had a brother come up here from Texas about 15 years ago, and that's all he tells anybody in Texas about Montana, is that boat tour. I know, we golfed all over the state, hiked, went to Yellowstone, boat tour, that's all he tells anybody. A couple of bits of trivia about the Capitol. This was the very first Capitol that was pre-wired for electricity, and it is the only Capitol in the U.S. that flies the Irish flag on St. Paddy's Day, which I think is very cool. And if you haven't been inside, you really ought to take a walk around the Capitol. It's wide open. Up on the third floor, there's a huge, and I mean an absolutely huge, Charlie Russell painting. It is 9 feet tall and 25 feet wide. And I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it seems like he was paid $15,000 to paint it, and it's worth millions now. So it's something to see. It's big. Basically, folks, that's all I've got for you on the tour. Drive around the block, we'll park this, I'm glad it didn't rain on us. And thank you for braving the weather.
That's pretty cool.
I keep thinking summer's coming and it keeps putting off.
They're still there.
Yep. This is good.
Yeah.
We don't
just
have,
walk down these
that
steps.
means we don't have to walk home.
Yeah, we just go down these steps right here.
Okay. Oh yeah, right there. That's even easier.
All right, thanks again, folks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We talked about tips, so. Tips,
Yeah.
but we're seeing how it holds up.
All right.